Very much. And look, can I first say what a pleasure it is to be in this absolutely amazing school. And I want to thank Katie, the head teacher, who I think is around somewhere. Maybe she's hiding. She's there. Katie, thank you for welcoming us to this school. I think this school deserves a massive round of applause because it is like an amazing cathedral. So let's hear it, ladies and gentlemen, for this amazing. I wish I could have been taught in a school like this. It's an absolutely amazing place, and I think it's a tribute both to your work, Joe, because this is your ward, to the work you did with the last Labour government. I also want to recognise somebody else in the audience. That's Eric Martin, my very, very good friend. He was a fantastic member of Parliament. Eric, we really missed you. I do slightly wonder why Eric now looks younger than he did when he was in Parliament. Maybe that's what stopping being an MP does for you. But Eric, it's great to see you. Look, friends, these are really important elections, and it's great to be back in Carlisle. I've been here a couple of times in the last couple of years, and it is very, very important that we fight these elections right across the country. The way we normally do these sessions is I want to give you a chance to ask me questions about the Labour Party, about what we're saying in these local elections, but let me just say a few things by way of introduction. First of all, I think we know that this government at Westminster is losing people's trust. It's losing people's trust because it came in and promised change. It promised the world would be different. It promised growth, and we've seen economic growth flatlining. It promised fairness, and we've seen a budget that cut taxes for millionaires and raised taxes for millions of people. It promised action on crime and a fairer society, and we've seen crime getting worse. On all its promises, it promised the NHS was safe in its hands, and that is the biggest broken promise of all, because they have betrayed all the promises they made on the National Health Service. And so, nearly 2 years on from this government being elected, I think we have a huge opportunity, because I don't think people think this is the change they voted for, and I don't think they think this government is delivering. But we've got to prove that we can make a difference. And you know why it's hard? It's hard because we've got to make a difference in really tough economic times. And there'll be lots of people who say to you, well, look, both parties accept the deficit's a problem, both parties accept it needs to be cleared, and so what difference can Labour really make? And I think that's actually one of the things that we've got to fight against. We've got to fight against the cynicism that people feel. Because lots of people will think, I voted for change, I voted for a different start. Nick Clegg told me that he was going to be different, that he'd do this on tuition fees. David Cameron told me he'd do that on the NHS. And now they've betrayed my promises. So aren't all politicians the same? And we've got to fight against that. And how do we fight against that? And this is what Joe is doing in this campaign with his pledges for Carlisle. We fight against it with realistic, costed proposals which show we can make a difference to people's lives. Now, people will say to you on the doorstep, well, look, I know what Joe's proposing in Carlisle because you've got a very good pledge card. What's Labour proposing nationally? What difference would Labour really make? And that's what I want to talk to you about briefly this evening. First priority. First priority for me, if I became Prime Minister tomorrow, get our young people back to work. It is an absolute outrage what is happening to our young people in this country. Look, I grew up in the 1980s. I remember a lost generation of young people, and I never thought we would see it again, but that is what we are seeing. I was looking at the figures. Long-term youth unemployment in Carlisle up by 177% in 1 year alone. So some people will say, well, look, everybody tries schemes, what difference would Labour make? We should tell people concretely the difference we would make. We would levy a tax on the bankers' bonuses, and we would use the money to put our young people back to work. We would say, we'll pay the wages to every employer in Britain. And if I were Prime Minister, I'd make it my business to get every employer in Britain behind this proposal. We'd say to the employers, we'll pay the wages, you provide the training, so you've got a responsibility to. It's not just a free labour for you. You provide the training, and young people have an obligation to take work that's available. Now, would that make a difference, people say? The answer is yes. We did something in government called the Future Jobs Fund, and I met some of those young people who were on the Future Jobs Fund the other day. And they told me they were in work 3-4 years later because of the opportunity provided by the Labour government. So, the first thing we do is we put our young people back to work. What's the second thing we do? The second thing we do is we say we've got to have fairness in our tax system. And you know, I met somebody earlier on today in Salford, and she said to me, I work as an employer, and I've got all these people coming to me who are saying to me, I currently work 16 hours and I get my tax credits, but in 3 days' time, just 3 days' time, Thursday of this week, they're going to lose their tax credits unless they work 24 hours because they're in a couple. I say that is a disgrace. I say it's a disgrace when you've got a government that says to the rich, well, we want to make you richer in order to persuade you to work harder, and to those on the minimum wage, well, we're going to make you poorer to make you work harder. That's the values of this government. So the second thing we do is we say, actually, we're not going to give the big tax breaks for pensions to the richest people in this country, which is what this government has done. They've given £1.6 billion back to the richest people in Britain, earning over 150,000. We'll say we'll use that money to cancel what they've done to tax credits, because that will make a difference to the working people of this country. That's the second thing we would do. It's not about more money. We're not spending more money. It's about different choices, different values, different priorities. What's the third thing we do? The third thing we do is we'd say, is it really right, after all they've contributed all their lives to this country, that the government decides that the soft target for tax rises is Britain's pensioners? Britain's pensioners on as little as £200 a week. I say that's wrong when you're giving a tax cut to millionaires. And so the third thing we do is we would say, we're not going to go ahead with the cut in the 50p tax rate, and we'd use that money to give the tax allowances to pensioners. I think that's the right choice. It's a different choice, but I think it's the right priority. There's three things that we would do. What's the fourth thing that we would do? We'd say we've got to get this country moving and this country building houses once again. And so we'd use some of the money from the bank bonus tax to start building houses again in this country. Because, you know, this government came in and they made a big deal out of the fact that house building was at an all-time low and that the Labour government hadn't built enough houses. And they've made the situation far, far worse. And that's bad for people who want to buy a home, and that's bad for our young people too, and that's bad for jobs in the construction industry. That's the fourth thing we do. And the fifth and final thing that we do is we would say, actually, we've got to stand up to those vested interests in our society, the energy companies, the train companies that have been ripping people off for too long. And you know, somebody asked me downstairs, Labour lost the general election badly in 2010. How have you changed? Well, I'll tell you one way we've changed. We've learned that the role of the Labour Party is to stand up to the vested interests in our society, and is to stand up on behalf of ordinary families to those vested interests. And so we would guarantee for every pensioner over the age of 75 the lowest tariff available. At the moment we say to pensioners, if you want cheap energy, shop around, use the internet, find the best deal. Well, that's not the way we should be working. You shouldn't be telling pensioners to just use the market. You should be telling them you will get the cheapest possible tariff. Now there are 5 ways, which aren't about spending extra money, of making our society fairer. And so I think it's really important that we say to people in these tough times, we can make a difference. Now some people will say, look, why aren't you making more promises? Why aren't you making bigger promises? And I say something very simple, which is, and it goes back to what I said earlier, look, part of our job is to restore trust in politics. And I often say I don't want to become Nick Clegg. Why do I say that? Because he made a whole series of promises he didn't keep. And actually, the truth is that undermines not just trust in the Liberal Democrats and the Tories, it undermines trust in all of us. And actually, that's what Joe's doing in his campaign in the local council elections. Because he's saying, I'm going to make promises I know I can keep. And that is so important for us, that we under-promise and over-deliver rather than over-promise and under-deliver. I just want to say one more thing before I finish. You might think, look, we're working as hard as we can here in Carlisle in these local council elections, but can we really make a difference? The answer is yes. The truth is that we lost very badly 2 years ago, and we are a party in the process of rebuilding. The best way we can rebuild is by winning back councillors and winning back councils. The best thing we can do to help take back Carlisle at the next general election is by winning the council elections. Now, I think it's important for the people of Carlisle to have a Labour council, but I also think it's important for them to have a Labour MP, because I think they'll be much better represented, and they were much better represented by Eric. And the best way we can do that is by winning back the council. So that's what I appeal to you to do. And the point I want to end on is this. Look, Labour in opposition, and I think Joe made reference to this, it is the hard yards of opposition. Labour's history in opposition, for those who know it, some people are in the room maybe old enough, don't want to be rude, to remember this. Labour's history in opposition is an inglorious history. We've ended up disunited, we've ended up moving away from the electorate, not towards it, and we've ended up being out of power for a long time. I don't think that's going to happen this time. I think we can be a one-term opposition. And the way we are a one-term opposition is by showing we can be responsible and make promises that we can keep, and showing we can make a difference to people's lives. We need to do that as a national party, we need to do that as a local party. That's why, Joe, your campaign is so important. That's why I'm so delighted to be here to support your campaign, and I wish you all the best of luck in May. I hope to see a Labour Council here in Carlisle after May the 3rd. Thank you very much.